Awesome. So we are live. Welcome to the Cool Data Project Show. I am Kristen Kerr, a developer advocate for Comet, where with one function, you can make your machine learning training runs reproducible. And this is the Cool Data Project Show, where I interview practitioners in ML, DL, and AI about interesting projects that they're working on. And today I am talking with David Yakobovitch. He's general partner at DataPower Ventures and global product lead at Google. And I'm super excited to speak with him. We've been friends now since probably 2018 when we were working at Emeritus together, creating online course content for like Dartmouth and Columbia's online courses. And so, David, super excited to have you. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about DataPower Ventures?
Awesome, Kristen. Thanks so much for having me. And I always love reconnecting because I love seeing how the industry continues to evolve. But with that, you have consistent movers and shakers in the industry. So it's great to see you continuing to land and build the blocks, the picks and shovels to help the data ML AI industry accelerate. Little on myself, I've been in the industry for a little more than a decade and went from working in actuarial science into data analytics and data science for over 5 startups, and now have landed at big tech. So really excited to continue to build among the whole ecosystem of data ML AI. Through that as well, I have a unique lens, having worked at multiple startups in the data space and working in different data product divisions, that I launched a couple of years ago, DataPower Ventures, to make the big bet investments in all things data ML and AI. So that means data tools, human in the loop tools, insights like real-time analytics, ML AI automation software, and then programmatic automation. So I've been making these 5 bets, and today we have more than 30 portfolio companies all across the US, from New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and great fast-growing cities like Austin, Denver, Boulder, and Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And so where in the startup journey should someone consider reaching out to angel investors? And are you getting a lot of people that like reach out and want to talk to you about their ideas, or are you going and seeking these people out yourself?
I'm a big proponent of community effects and network effects. And so I think when you're a prospective founder, maybe you're not a founder yet, you're working at big tech or you're working at a traditional company and you're considering becoming a founder, it's always the right time to start having authentic conversations with other players in the ecosystem. And as a result of that, being based in New York City, I launched also a tech dinner series and tech drink series where we connect founders, investors, operators, and developers so you can grab a drink and pitch your idea in a no pressure environment to just see people's thoughts and think of each conversation as an early design partner interview as you're building out your concept. I think founders can always think about reaching out to angel investors. Investors are very open and approachable. Most investors, believe it or not, were also in your shoes at one point as an early founder. They may have been a founder themselves. They may have been an operator at big tech or at multiple startups. They might actually be thinking about founding companies in the future, and they're looking to deploy capital into the next big bets that they believe, one, are going to shape the future of the economy, both from a micro perspective and macro perspective. And two, it also fits in with their ideal worldview of what could the future be when it's more tech-driven or data-driven. So I strongly encourage you to approach angel investors if you're looking to found and you're looking to raise. Now, if you're looking to start that dialogue, what's the best way to connect with angel investors? I would say, in general, a warm intro is ideal. If you know someone who knows an angel investor, that's a great way to get, for example, to top of inbox or to get in someone's calendar. So I think that's really helpful, but it's not always required. There's a variety of angel investors in the ecosystem who have the no intro needed introduction. clause. And so I'm one of those where you can basically cold outreach me. So you could just like email me if you discover me from VC Twitter or one of those spaces, or straight on our website. Where we have a pitch form, because it's like, I'm like, why not? We need to increase accessibility for founders. Not every founder comes from Stanford GSB or Harvard HBS, right? Founders come in all shapes and sizes. And I do encourage, if you're considering raising, to know that it is a process. And just because an investor might say, no, not now, it's not a right fit, it doesn't mean all investors say, no, not now. It's a process. So if you pitch, for example, 10 investors, maybe 2 or 3 are interested. Well, what if you end up pitching 25 or 50 or 100, right? You're increasing that funnel for conversion, and it is very much that business process. Also, when you're speaking to angel investors, it's important to understand what's important for them. Let's say you're building a cool data product and you're pitching an investor who focuses on ed tech, and your product has nothing to do with education technology. The investor just might not be that excited. They're gonna maybe they'll still take a chat with you because they'll say, oh, this is really interesting, I want to learn more. And they might connect you to other investors who focus on ed tech and education technology industry. But it's important for you to recognize, as you're going through that fundraising cycle, who are those ideal customer profiles of your investors. And I encourage you to look them up. For example, if you were looking up David Yakobovitch, you very quickly would see from my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my website, blog posts that I'm all in on data. So like if you're doing anything in the data ML AI space, I love to talk to you, whether you are not a founder yet, currently founder, pre-seed Series A. So it does vary, and those are things to consider. On the journey as well, like how often should you reach out? I'd encourage founders to reach out before you're planning to raise. So if you, for example, are very early in your journey and you're raising that first friend and family or angel round, you can start as early as the idea, because you want to get champions who support you and are willing to make those first checks and those early bets to help you accelerate momentum as you're building out your venture-backed startup. At DataPower, we have a variety of modalities of connecting with founders that we're excited to back. Today, with over 30 portfolio companies, we have a lot of warm introductions coming in from founders. So founders who we backed 2-3 years ago are now saying, David, you should meet this other founder who's also operating in the space that we think you would be interested to talk to and potentially back as well. Beyond that, just like today, speaking with Kristen, this great dialogue on cool data project show. I've had for a few years the Humane AI podcast, where we featured Kristen a few years ago. So we definitely bring great startups there even before they're raising as well. So there's a variety of approaches. As an investor, I attend a lot of demo days and showcases, seeing different startups presenting and pitching, whether they're going through the big accelerators like the Tech Stars and Y Combinators, or even more local ones like Alchemist on the West Coast, and even ones that are very hyper focused, like SOSV's Hacks Accelerator in Newark, New Jersey, or New Lab in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, always willing to speak with founders in very focused ecosystems. So a lot of approaches there, a lot more we could definitely unpack.
Oh my God, there was so much good stuff there. And a couple things that you talked about, if you pitch one person and it's not a fit, because again, I didn't realize too how some VCs really focus on, real tight areas, right? But it's a lot like just building a business in general, right? Like you just need to be okay with getting shot down a bit. I think people, look at somebody who's built a business and say, okay, well, they must have gotten a lot of yeses. And it's like, oh, but really, I'm comfortable getting a lot of no's. And I think that that's a big piece of it. And, you know, the other thing that I thought that you said was interesting, that it's never too early. Honestly, I thought you were going to come on and be like, man, yeah, people always want to reach out and tell me about their project and it gets tiring. So it was like really refreshing to hear that you're interested and very, like, I don't know, it just felt very welcoming and, you know, open to people of all stages and uplifting.
Thank you, Kristen. And I love the point that you shared about getting to know. I believe it's important to get to a quick no. It depends, again, which investor you're pitching. If the investor is, for example, myself, someone who focuses exclusively on data, ML, and AI, I may not give you a no. I might give you a not now. And then I'll share reasons why, whether it's traction or product velocity or business velocity. Because sometimes you won't get to a permanent no, but it's a no, not now. And what are the reasons why? And are there certain milestones or metrics that, as founders, the investors are requesting you to achieve before an investment would be made to deploy that capital? And that answer will vary from investor to investor, but it's important to ask that question. And I think it's great for investors to be asked those questions from founders. Founders should be willing to be aggressive and assertive. They should be willing to meet you at the table and ask, you know, hey, are you willing to invest now? And if not, why not? And also be open to receiving that feedback. I think one of the challenges often, to the point that you and I both share, Kristen, that raising is like running a business, running a sales cycle. Well, it's more than just that. It is relationship building. So, for example, an investor may decide to pass today in your pre-seed, but they might be willing to come in at your seed or your Series A. They might also be willing to make introductions to other investors for you that they think could be a good fit or up their thesis or the thematics that those investors invest in. And so it's good to build those good relationships and actually treat each conversation as a long-term endeavor. What I mean by that is often we'll see founders who make a pitch who you can tell right away they're just treating you as another investor. They don't even, like, frankly, are interested in DataPower Ventures, our thesis, our thematic, who we are. And so you can quickly tell that, well, it has to be a fit from both the founder and the investor perspective. Just like when you get hired for a company, right? It has to be that cultural fit. And when you're looking at different investors, something else that you mentioned, really fascinating, Kristen, is about the thematics. So you do have some investors who are generalist or agnostic or all-purpose investors. So they'll say, hey, you know, whether you're building technology in the medical ecosystem or in the finance ecosystem, we invest. But that's not our narrative at DataPower Ventures. We're focusing on investing in the next 1,000 cool data projects, right? The next 1,000 applied AI, applied ML, applied data startups that are focused on building and landing and expanding that ecosystem.
Very cool. And so we do have a question from Robert. Robert, thank you so much for joining. He's so great. And this is absolutely a question I was going to ask as well. But what project metrics are considered when you're thinking about making an investment?
So I love the term project that we talk about, like the cool data project show. And often in the industry, people don't think of it as a project for what you're building. But a lot of that going from idea to startup is around experimentation. It truly is a project. It could be launching in public, building on GitHub, getting those stars, starting to get that early data from users who are potentially using your open source software or app or whichever ecosystem you're building. So metrics, there's no one size fits all. But when you think of the box, ultimately, there's two sides that you want to uncover. One is the product velocity, and two is the business velocity. Let's unpack each one. So product velocity, what does this mean? You're building your cool data project. Perhaps it's a new tool in the modern data stack. You're building some data visualization, no code tool. Well, are you just shipping updates once a year? Or are you shipping updates once every 6 months, once every 3 months, once every month, once every 2 weeks? What do those builds look like? Are they nightly? Are they weekly? And what's being shipped from those features or those bug fixes? And I believe that the data industry is evolving like the software industry was just a decade or so ago, that now we're building data toolkits and data packages. And these are being developed similar to how software's been built. You can look at startups like Comet, for example, right? Incredible developer velocity. The product continues to evolve, a lot of shipping, a lot of new features, and they're listening to those early customers and design partners. Hey, we love your product, but we could take it from 95% love to 99% love if you add this extra feature. And then the team goes out and prioritizes feature builds to ensure that the product is gaining the customer love. And so no matter what stage, I do think it's hypercritical to listen to the voice of your customer, though that voice isn't necessarily one person. There's been a lot of great books in the ecosystem and stories that talk about the classic getting to 100 customers or getting to 100 design partners. If you're building a product and you speak with 100 startups, 100 companies that have a willingness to pay for your product, and you start hearing a similar message, a similar theme from these prospective customers, that's a good indicator that might be something for you to build, and that then they would buy that product as well. So that's on the product side. Be willing to ship faster, be willing to ship in public, be willing to make smaller ships. You don't have to make major releases. You could have minor releases, smaller patches as well. And then when you do those as well, be willing to celebrate them. It's fine if a new release only has 2 updated features. Well, let's talk about it. Create a YouTube video, create a Loom video, create a blog post, go on a podcast, talk about your new feature, talk about why this is game changing, talk about the incrementality and the experimentation. Often we don't see founders celebrating the small wins enough when they're building for product velocity. And by declaring that in public, that's also an indicator to prospective customers to go over the edge and sign and pay, whether it's self-serve or more white glove service. And the same thing is for investors. To see that momentum is a great indicator that, wow, this founding team, they can build and they're not afraid to ship. Even if it's not the final product, they're going after that. So that's side one of the coin. That's the product velocity. The side 2 of that is the business velocity. Business metrics can vary, of course. Some early stage startups are not about turning on revenue. They're about building open source, getting that user velocity. For example, can I get to my first 100 GitHub stars, my 1,000 GitHub stars, 1,000 downloads on Anaconda or whichever ecosystem you're on, to start getting people to use the product. But it could be other cohort metrics. How many times a day is someone in their CLI or in their notebook running the code snippet that calls on your package? And if that's becoming more frequent, perhaps those users are starting to get more excited about your product as well. So it doesn't always have to be turning on money. Turning on money, of course, given the current macro uncertainty, is a good thing as well, right? Having a variety of options of here's our free version of the product, our freemium, and here's the premium where you get these extra features. Maybe you get more memory, more storage, or better, quicker SLA times for customer success as well. So there's a variety of metrics to think about. So those are just a couple I wanted to unpack for the listeners here today.
Awesome. Awesome. And so one thing that you mentioned too was about, being open to building in public. So I know like when somebody is thinking often of creating something, often they think that like, I can't share my idea because someone's going to steal it and run with it. Can you just shed some light on how you think about, when maybe building in public might be like, is that only for something that's going to be open source, or is it, anyone? Because, the ideas are cheap and it's the execution, or like where, how would somebody maybe think through that?
So let's dispel some myths. So myth number one, big tech is going to steal your idea. Farther from the truth. So I've worked now in traditional companies, 5 startups, and big tech. And I'll tell you, for big tech, they need to see a lift of like $1 billion+ to even run with an idea. So you're building your great startup in ML ops, data ops, AI ops, wherever it is, they're not going to steal your idea. There's no time. They're working on so many sprints in their own internal releases for internal dev tools or whichever external release candidates that they're pushing, that there's just not enough time. So I would like to encourage founders to know that I think it's quite improbable that big tech would take your ideas, though once you build it, if it's successful, they might want to acquire you. So that could be a good success.
That'd be sweet. Yeah.
Right,
that is the end goal, right?
Right. 3 to 5 years down the road, Apple, Google, Amazon decides we'd love to buy you for X millions. Okay, that's a great success story. Myth number 2, only build in private because my competitors are gonna like steal my my software, my code, what I've done. I don't think so. Having worked for multiple startups, there's so much velocity about what you're building from a product perspective. It's very hard to mimic a product because building the product, that's great. But if there's no actual product market fit, then it's not going to land. So we've often seen companies that, for example, are like, oh, we're going to build the next ELT tool because we think ELT is just a hot space. So let's raise $5 million and build it because everyone else is building ELT tools. And then no customers show up and the startup goes out of business because they never went through design interviews and had those customers willing to pay who've been bought into the process, who are excited about your narrative because they feel that, wow, I've built the tool. Even though I didn't build it, like I was along for the journey of that year or 2 years while this founder geared up, launched this, and now my customer willing to pay. So it's very unlikely that competitors will steal your product. But myth number 3, building in public with my marketing is my greatest asset. So it is a strong asset if you're first mover advantage, though I will say, having been on both sides of the coin, startups will, without remorse, steal your marketing, steal your content, steal your copy. All the time. So it's not talked about in the industry. So I like to talk about it on the show. Like, I like, even for me, for example, like I launched just for fun, a meetup called Talk Data to Me. It's pretty clear. Like I launched it. And then like 6 months later, there's copycats all over the world. Now I love when you're like doing something personally, because if someone copies you, it's flattery. It's like imitation is the best flattery to be like, all right, you totally agree with my sentiment in the world. That is so awesome. But when you're a startup, like you have a product marketing or business acceleration channels that take so much effort. So you kind of don't want to see that. But then I'll indicate then the way around that can be quite successful is going with channel partners. I think this is one of the least approached efforts early on in startups journey. that they'll think I have to go through the sale process myself, whether it's self sign-up pages or having my sales development reps or business development reps. We got to do everything alone. And I think that's further from the truth. I think channel partners are a fantastic way to accelerate and grow revenue if you're turning on revenue. We often see startups really go that route when they're in growth stages, like Series B and above. Though I think that's something you could turn on early on, because then you have more irons in the fire. So it's a little bit easier to potentially land customers as well.
Nice. And so we have another question, and I was wondering this one as well. Sort of similar to what we've been talking about, but do investors like the software product to be open sourced or kept proprietary? So I don't know if this is sort of like, is there going to be somebody who wished that the, IP was a little bit more private, or, how are you guys thinking through that sort of?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk the last few years in the industry about should the product be only open source? Should the product be only closed source proprietary? Should it be hybrid? It's a big challenge to decide, but you see with products like Comet and others who build in open, who have this open source, but then have these other layers where you can get these more premium features. But it is a big decision you have to make early on, whether you want to go that fully open source approach or not. We've been seeing a wave of startups, though, who often take open source technology and then fork the technology and then build out their own flavor and customizations and builds to that as well. I believe Streamlit was one that's become quite successful in the space, and there's been others in the data space who've done those forks. Today, for example, there's a variety of startups out there that have overall forked the big Kafka pipelines, right? A lot of them, like Confluence and Red Pandas, which is Vectorize.io, and others have done forks. Of course, since they forked, there's been so much divergence, right? So many builds and adjustments, but using some of that core technology that's innovative to build. So I think at the end of the day, whether you go open source or not, it's about your go-to-market motions and your belief on the industry. So we even see in big tech that traditionally packages like PyTorch were designed from the Facebook parent company Meta, and TensorFlow was designed from Google's parent company Alphabet. And these were initially closed source projects in the ML industry, which were open sourced for the benefit of all. But in sharing those examples, I want to caution you, it's that companies like Meta and Google generally give away the house, so to speak. They give away 98% of products for free because they can, because the business is generally built on an open, accessible ecosystem powered by ads. So it does vary. And those solutions of big tech may or may not work for you with your idea. Though there are a lot of benefits, again, to build in open and build in public, because say you get all these GitHub stars and these comments for feature requests, and perhaps these even forks, people who are so excited by what you're building. These can all be your early design partners and prospective customers. So if you're building in public and you have 1,000 stars, if you are not reaching out to every single person who starred your GitHub package, what are you waiting for? Now's the time, right? Reach out, everyone. Maybe they're a student, maybe they're a researcher at big tech, maybe they're at a big company and they're looking for a solution to one of their problems, and it just so happens that they'd be willing to pay for your solution.
Oh man, and on that, so somebody's building in public. When would they think about, or how do they want to think about whether to continue bootstrapping or to go get funding?
So the startup ecosystem has evolved over the last 2 decades and continues to evolve in the macroeconomic climate. Um, Classically, we talk about building ventures that are bootstrapped or building ventures that are venture backed. So bootstrapped would be, for example, like Zoho Docs or Basecamp, these companies that have also been around for over 10 years, but never took venture dollars because they wanted to build something slow and steady. And with the growth rate over time, they've both become quite successful ventures, north of 100 million ARR. So you have to decide, what is it that you want to lead with? Do you want to be in more control? Do you want to be more slow and steady, but not have the capital to accelerate that growth? Then you might go bootstrapped. If you want to build something and potentially build what's known as a rocket ship, the next big thing, and you want to have the firepower to expand product and sales motions very quickly, this is why you would think about going venture backed. Also, venture backed, which means backed by angels or VCs or syndicates, generally means you're looking to build a company that one day can get to 100 million ARR or above. The classic milestone of IPOing or going public in the financial markets is 100 million ARR. And that milestone fluctuates as we see this year, and that may change as the market conditions change as well. But I think if you're looking to build something big and you don't have your own war chest firepower, you don't have millions of dollars in the bank to finance something yourself, venture backed is a good option. It's just important to note that when you go venture backed, you are giving up control to a certain perspective to your investors. Some of your investors may become on the board. They might be advisors. They might be board observers. And they'll have some ownership in the company as well. And with that ownership, they lend their voice to you and your team as you build. And that can evolve over time, because as you continue to raise venture dollars, more and more ownership you're giving to these investors. And then that means they have more say in the directionality that you grow the business. Usually less so the product. Investors are just excited for you to build product quickly, and they'll do their best to get customers in front of you or get other partners. If you're like, hey, we're thinking about this feature, should we do it? Go, no go. The investors will say, okay, well, we have some people you could chat with, and maybe they could help inspire you in that direction. But you are, and your founding team and your founding engineers are ultimately the subject matter experts on what you're building in that cool data project, soon to be startup.
Yeah. And so that actually just made me think of something. And, I'm claiming ignorance, and, I didn't let you know I was going to ask this. So if it's not some direction we want to go, that's cool. But, I know that women get very little of venture funds, and you were talking about how when you get funding, you're giving away a bit of control, right? And a lot of times that control looks like you got to work really hard to meet somebody else's now expectations. Do you think that, women aren't going for funding as much? Do you think it might have something to do with not wanting to, put themselves in a position where they're going to have to really try and hit some benchmarks that are going to be, are women going for funding and not getting it? Or do you think that maybe there's something there in the way that, just a difference in approach that might be more, just look a little bit more positive to certain types of people?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that question. And when we think of women in tech, whether it's like women as data scientists, women as software engineers, women as startup employees, women at big tech, or even women as founders, there's still quite an underrepresented population overall. And I've seen this at every startup I've worked at, where it's still predominantly male driven. And I don't think it needs to be that way. And I think that organizations are not making enough efforts to encourage and to bring in talented women partners into companies as leaders. I'm not even talking about just as engineers and like middle managers, but bring women into leadership. I've worked with a variety of all-star women at the startups I've worked with, and they are powerful both voices and business leaders who can get things done. And I think often it's a part of an evolution in the world of work and tech, is that traditionally, women were not exploring the field as much. And now we're seeing the early data coming out from top universities that more than half of the learners in some of these computer science programs are women in tech. So why aren't we seeing the same parity for women being placed in tech jobs, or women's salaries receiving the same amount? And that is, at the end of the day, it's because organizations are slow to adapt. They're slow to do change management, and there needs to be more efforts from organizations, from nonprofits, from regulators to ensure that we have more of a fair playing field for women getting into tech. Now, equating that specifically to founders, so we look at a lot of exciting startups in the ecosystem, and both founders who are women and founders who are not, across all different backgrounds. For us, we don't specifically have a mandate at DataPower Ventures on investing in BIPOC, in women, LGBTQ, or any of those areas, because we choose to focus on like the metrics around product business velocity. Though we have conversations with a lot of founders in those backgrounds, and if the product and what they're building aligns, we'll go forward with that approach. So I think that's very important. Some of the startups we backed do have women co-founders and women founders. One of them is GroupIt, which is a sales intelligence platform spun out from Microsoft. It's launched by Tammy Savage. She's one of the original product managers on MSN and other Microsoft diehard products we've seen over the decades. We've also backed Ash, which is a wealth slipping on my words right now, wellness and health platform. So Ash is a wellness and health platform for diagnostic testing. And one of the early co-founders is a woman in tech as well. So we are seeing definitely more interest in the space. But both of those startups, of course, are led by women founders. From an investment perspective of how much venture capital dollars are being achieved still, I believe the number is somewhere less than 5 or 10% for women founders. So it's still historically low. And I think part of that is also getting more women into VC. And we're starting to see more emerging funds and leaders in the space who are women in the industry, so they can advocate and speak for that representation as well. One other approach I'll take on this topic is also about founding startups. I think for a lot of the women I meet who are deciding to build in public their startup, they're not as often, so this is just the data points I see, they're not as often taking on multiple co-founders. You'll often see men in the room who are like, hey, I'm running a co-founding team of 2, 3, or 4 people. And you'll see more often solo founders for women in tech. I think part of it is there might be a little bit less of a risk appetite of wanting more control and ensuring things get built slower is fine, being in the long game as well. I actually was just running some events this quarter, speaking with both women and men founders. And I had a conversation the same night with a woman founder and with a man founder. And they both were like, oh, should I take on a co-founder? It was the same question. It's one of the classic questions. Should I bring on a co-founder? Should I go through like YC's founder matching program or one of these efforts? And I told both of them, and I said, well, it depends. What do you want to achieve? And do you already have everything you need to be successful or not? So both the woman and man co-founder are technical co-founders. So for them, I'm like, well, you can already build product and technology and ship it. So maybe you need help with like some of the business, the commercialization, the go-to-market approach. And if that's the case, if you're going to take a co-founder, that person might be with you for 3, 5, or 10 years. It could be a long journey. Now, in one end, it's to your benefit to have a co-founder because then the journey is less lonely, right? You have someone to share in both the small wins, the successes, and the not so great moments. Though you want to ensure they're an advocate, a voice that can partner up with you. So I often tell founders that if you're going the solo route and you don't know yet if you want to take someone as a co-founder, trial them out. You could bring someone in as your VP of business and set up an equity package where, it's not like all the equity vests immediately. It vests over 4 years, and then some of it vests every quarter, so that in the event that it's not the right fit, you're not giving away the majority share of the house, but you've reserved that and you're able to amicably part ways without sacrificing the integrity of your startup.
That is amazing. And so what was the last startup that you looked at and you said, wow, this is amazing, I want to give you some money?
Yeah, so we're so excited to back founders who build all around product and business. And so our mission is that we're investing in tenacious founders who land product features and optimize sales channels to commercialize applied AI and deep tech ventures. With that said, one of the companies I'm most proud to back, I briefly mentioned, is Ash. So Ash Wellness, or Powered by Ash, is a remote diagnostic testing startup that initially focused on the LGBTQ population for STI testing, and later expanded to over 150 different tests. Basically everything that is not COVID and not Theranos blood testing. So they focused on everything else and have grown so great in the last couple of years. They went through 500 startups and Cornell Tech's runway program in Roosevelt Island in New York. And the founding team persevered through the pandemic. They persevered through labs turning off. They persevered through testing result changes, landing and losing clients. And it's been so exciting. We've backed them since the early days when they were just leaving Cornell Tech. But then most recently, they've become one of our most exciting big bets, where we backed them in spring 2022. And since then, their revenue's up 3x. They're now in the multi-millions and gearing up for a Series A soon. So we're super excited to back them, not only because the founders can build and iterate on product and build and iterate on business, but they got thick skin and they're not letting changing ecosystem, changing players shut them down. They're pivoting, they're adjusting, they're figuring out ways to make it work. And that is definitely the heart in any startup, that it's not just, people always use the phrase, as I shared earlier, it's like a rocket ship, right? It's not going to just like magically go up, right? There's going to be more like ups and downs, like a staircase where there's some broken stairs, and then
Broken stairs.
missing stairs. You have to go back down, grab a ladder, help the stairs so you can get back up, and slippery slopes, and all those things. So it's definitely a journey for sure. And the founders are extremely tenacious, and they're on a noble mission. Also, you can tell when founders are so committed to bringing accessibility, in this case for healthcare, to all, with diagnostic testing everywhere, that it's, I'm not going to bet against this founder. I'm going to bet with this founder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been something really exciting. Of course, they're on mandate. They build data API integrations between diagnostic testing and big health providers like Epic Health Systems. They manage data flows across all parts of the health ecosystem and encourage better, faster insights for both payers and providers.
Nice.
So there is a lot of that core data play. They were a cool data project that now is a cool data startup.
Right? Do any of them want to be on my show? So Tim had a question. What insights would you give to an aspiring founder who is planning to start a data-centric company in a highly regulated market like finance? I always find it funny when I go to a conference and like everyone's talking about their work, and then you talk to the guy who's working in the finance industry and he's just all closed-lipped.
So if you're looking to build cool data products in a regulated industry, as early on as possible, you want to get allies in that industry. So if you can get advisors for your startup who might work with or around some of those governing bodies, or they've worked on some of those regulations, that's helpful. Maybe early employees who led compliance or efforts across the industry can be useful as well. And as you're building, you want to be building from the early days with regulators, because if you're in a hyper regulatory ecosystem, regulators appreciate your willingness to talk early on, because what they're going to do is help you avoid mistakes or early pitfalls. The worst thing you'd want to do is build something for 2-3 years, raise $10-20 million. You're launching the product, and then the regulators say, no, you can't do this, and they shut you down. We've seen this firsthand in China, particularly around the education tech industry, where just earlier this year, the regulators and government said, we don't want to have unfair advantages for students to go from high school to college. So we're going to ban the tutoring industry. And all the companies went from, X valuation to zero valuation overnight. And the same can happen here, as we're seeing in other industries in the States, where there's a lot of evolution because of regulation. Companies are being impacted, both startups and big tech, every day. So by having those early conversations, have those regulators as your design partners. And, while they may not be able to give you all the secret sauce and share everything behind the scenes, they could be good stewards to guide you in that right direction. And then perhaps when regulation does come to this part of the industry in 1, 3, 5 years, your company, because you built with regulators, you're not going to be adversely impacted by any of those changes.
That's really fascinating. So what advice would you have for someone who's looking to start looking for funding? Are there any online resources that would be really good for them to check out? Maybe something we could link in the comments.
Yeah, so if you're starting to look for funding, your early days, you're going to either be looking for friend and family round, or you're going to look for an angel round or a party round with multiple friends, family, and angels together. The first early thing, as always, create your pitch deck, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So your pitch deck is typically this, Google Slides or PDF that talks about your team, your mission, the problem, the solution, your current traction, the market opportunity, and how you're going to put money to work. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to evolve just like your product. I've seen some early pitch decks that I saw a founder when they were raising friend and family, and then I saw their pitch deck at seed, and it was completely different, but the idea remained the same. So be willing to make that early. Be willing to commit to your idea, your vision, but also don't be willing to be so tied to how the deck looks or what the content is, because that can change over time. Also be willing to, when you're looking for funding, to start having those conversations and truly listening to investors. One thing we do at DataPower Ventures that I think is quite unique is I don't take a pitch from a founder, but we have a conversation. So we'll have your deck, like, let's talk about you. Let's talk about what you've done. We'll talk about some things in the deck. But like most founders, you've just been going through this rote repetition of dozens or hundreds of pitches. And then the meeting ends and there's no time for feedback. I'd much rather have a conversation, dive deep into what's going on in the industry, how we can be helpful, and things like that. Resources for you to check out early in your days. There's so much out there in the market, but one resource I really like is NFX.com. They have a free tool called Signal. So signal.nfx.com. And what I really like about this tool is for founders, it's free to basically see a database of investors and what they invest in. If they invest in data, AI, fintech, health tech. It's a pretty cool platform. And I love it because for me as an investor, I create my profile and I share about our investments and what we do. And it's a great way for you to kind of get a sense of who do you want to maybe have on your cap table, your capital table when you invest. And as of the time of this recording, Signal has more than 25,000 investors. And some of these investors directly invest as like angels, and others invest from their funds as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there to explore what that would look like as you're considering to raise. I do think it's always a great time to raise, especially if you need that capital now. Though it's important to always be building your company and product. So sometimes we'll see a founder, for example, who's like, oh, we're raising a $5 million seed so we can build our MVP. Okay, you heard me pause there. Do you have design partners? Have you tested this? Like, why do you need $5 million just to get an MVP app off the ground? So probably not a good use of investor dollars. And the founder may wonder why they're stumbling around trying to get the capital. So I encourage you to also see what are the milestones you need to hit and how will those financial resources enable you to do that. You need $5 million for the MVP. Maybe the bare minimum you need is 500,000. But what would it be like in an ideal world if you have 1.5 million and then if you have 3 million? How would that change the game for you to level up at these stages with your investment? So those are things to consider. And then if you and your team know that, you can set your milestones to achieve and then oversubscribe that as well. And investors would be excited to hear more about that vision and the way you're going to allocate the capital I think that's one of the most unmet slides in decks that founders don't have a clear vision on, is how they're actually going to allocate and deploy the capital. And then
That's not the first thing they put in the deck.
no, it's usually towards the end of the deck, but
Yeah.
but it's one of the weakest slides. So it's a slide I would encourage founders to beef up on. And
Mhm.
then also, a lot of investors want to know, okay, great. So you're raising 500,000, 1.5, 3 million, whatever the number. What milestones will you achieve before your next round?
Mhm.
So when we talk about bootstrapping versus venture backed, if you're going to raise venture backed funding, you're going to raise it and you're going to generally continue to raise it. It's not like I'm going to raise a round and then stop. You either raise or you don't. So that's the big journey for startups to think about. Like if you want to go bootstrap, that's great. But if investors are putting in money, they want you to accelerate your product, accelerate your business. And there is that expectation that you're going venture back the whole way until either acquisition or hitting the public markets, whichever happens first. And lastly, I'll share about if you're looking for funding, at DataPower Ventures, we are actively deploying capital. We're allocators in the space. We're investing in multiple data-powered companies across insights, data tools, human-in-the-loop tools, real-time AI ML software and programmatic automation. Every month, we're making new allocations. So you're welcome to pitch us. And we have our pitch form, our startup intake form directly on our website at datapower.vc.
Nice. Get your decks together, folks. Where else can people find and follow you? Where are you hanging out on the web?
Yeah, so I spend the majority of my time building. So I have a more scarce presence. But one, if you're looking to pitch or invest, datapower.vc, check it out. Two, if you're in the greater New York area, SF or Seattle area, I am running these tech dinners where I connect founders, investors, developers, and operators. So check out our events. I post them on LinkedIn all the time. So LinkedIn is probably my number one modality to interact with the developer and business communities. And three, beyond that, similar to Kristen, I run this humane podcast where I feature founders building data ML AI products anywhere from pre-seed to IPO. So when you're building your product, raising your round, announcing a new partnership, we'd be happy to explore episodes for you as well on your cool data projects turning into cool data products.
We can just funnel people to each other.
I love it.
Awesome. So is there anything else that you have a real desire to share, or?
I believe that the data industry is one of the areas that are not getting enough attention. Again, similar to how the software industry was the fuel of growth from the late 90s through probably around 2015 or so. I think now is the time for data ML AI, for applied AI, and a focus there. There is renewed attention around generative AI that we've all heard about in the last few months, but it is only 1% of the industry. There's so much more going on in generative AI. It's exciting that we're getting a spotlight now for founders and investors who focus on the data ML AI industry to build and invest. Though I do want to encourage founders also not to always get distracted by the new shiny object of generative AI. We've been backing, we'll call real-time collaborative NLP or AI startups for a few years, which is now this generative AI stuff. But it's still too soon to tell what that impact will be to commercialize business. When you build something, build it based on your vision, the world how you see it, the world how you want to see it, and then see the technology like these data ML AI tools as part of your toolkit to help enable you to create that world, to create that vision, and bring everyone else along for the ride as well.
Nice. We're all going along for the ride. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much, David, for joining. This was an amazing session. I learned a ton and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope everyone has an amazing day. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Kristen.